In the dead hours of night, when neon signs flicker and city noise gives way to silence, there are still places in modern Asia where the old world refuses to die, where history isn't written in books, but in blood, in mirrors, in dreams. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, a place where we unearth the buried, where urban life masks ancient curses, where forgotten rituals claw their way back through cracks in the concrete. Tonight, we go to Seoul, a city racing toward the future, glass towers, LED billboards, cafes that never close. But even here, even now, something watches from behind the mirror. This is not a story about a haunted house. It's a story about something sealed, hidden, something waiting. You've heard of ghosts, but what if the ghost doesn't want to leave? What if it wants you to take its place? This is the back room of Unit 5A. The rain had stopped just long enough for the taxi to pull into the narrow alleyway behind the officetel complex. Rainwater still clung to the windows like smeared breath, and the night air smelled faintly of wet concrete, metal, and the faint sweetness of something floral and rotting, like forgotten incense. Ji-yoon stepped out, hoodie pulled low, clutching the straps of her oversized backpack as if it could shield her from the unfamiliar. The building looked like every other in Seoul's redeveloped districts: glass doors, fingerprint entry system, sleek mailboxes, a small cafe on the ground floor that boasted imported coffee beans and minimalist lighting. Clean, clinical, new. But standing at the entrance, Ji-yoon felt it, that unshakable sensation of being watched, not by people, not by cameras, but by something older than surveillance. She shook it off. This was the start of her fresh chapter, a new life, far from the whispers of a failed exhibition, the breakup that followed, and the crushing silence of expectations unmet. Unit 5A, top floor, end of the hall. She liked the sound of it. She liked the price even more. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Ji-yoon glanced at her reflection. Tired eyes, chapped lips, a half smile that didn't quite reach her cheeks. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Maybe this place would change that. The hallway was unnaturally quiet when she stepped out. No sound from other units, no murmurs of music or clinking dishes, just her footsteps on polished tile and the occasional buzz of flickering overhead lights. She found 5A at the very end, a plain door, freshly painted white with a new brass number plate and a digital keypad already set to the code she'd received from the realtor. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she typed it in. Click. The door opened to a space smaller than the listing had made it seem. Still, it had its charm. A compact living area with wide windows, a kitchenette tucked in the corner, a bathroom with a rain shower, and a small walk-in closet the ad had labeled as storage. The walls were painted in a matte cream. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and something medicinal. Ji-yoon dropped her backpack, cracked her knuckles, and started unpacking. She laid her sketchbooks on the narrow desk, propped her tablet against the wall, and plugged in her charging station. Her fingers twitched with the need to draw, but the exhaustion in her chest won out. As she moved through the apartment, she noticed something strange. The floor plans she'd studied over and over again listed one bathroom, one storage space. But there at the end of the hallway, past the closet, stood another door. Except it wasn't quite a door. It was flush with the wall. No knob, no frame, just a faint outline, like a scar in the concrete, almost invisible unless you were looking. And around it, barely visible beneath a layer of white paint, were the ghostly remnants of symbols, circles, curved lines, something hand-drawn in what looked like red ochre, now faded to rust. Ji-yoon blinked. Maybe it was some leftover construction sketching. Maybe it was waterproofing work. She reached out and ran her fingers along the outline. Cold. The wall was colder here than the rest of the unit. She pulled her hand away and laughed quietly to herself. Don't be weird, Ji-yoon. You're tired. Everything feels eerie when you're alone and underslept. Still, the hallway light flickered once, just once, and then stayed on. She didn't unpack anything else that night. The first dream came before dawn. She was sitting cross-legged in a bare concrete room. Her sketch pad rested on her knees, and her hands moved without her control. Charcoal smeared her fingers, black dust thick in her nails. The face on the paper didn't look like anything she recognized. Wide eyes, dark hair matted against hollow cheeks. A woman? No. Something wrong with the eyes. Too deep, too knowing. And then the eyes blinked. The paper twitched. Ji-yoon gasped. The light above her buzzed and flared. She awoke drenched in sweat, her skin clammy, her chest tight with a panic she couldn't name. The morning sun bled weakly through the windows. She reached for her tablet. Battery, 6%. That didn't make sense. She'd left it at 85%, and it was on standby. She padded barefoot into the hallway, rubbed her arms against the chill, and stopped in front of the sealed outline again. It felt like the dream was still clinging to her skin. The hair at the back of her neck prickled. A whisper of sound, breath, passed from the other side. She held her own breath to make sure it wasn't hers. There it was again, breathing, faint, measured, coming from behind a wall with no door. She backed away. Later that afternoon, she visited the landlord's office. A young woman greeted her with a tablet and a polite smile. Yes, Unit 5A? Yes, I had a question about the floor plan. Is there a second room in the back, near the closet? The receptionist frowned, tapped the tablet, flipped it around. One bathroom, one storage room, nothing else. No, it's all standard. No second room. Maybe you're seeing an access panel. No, this looks like a door. There's even markings, painted over. Markings? Red ones, symbols. Probably from renovation, old construction guides. Right, but Ji-yoon's voice didn't sound convinced, even to herself. She walked back to the building, slower this time, watched the windows, watched her reflection in the elevator mirror as the doors closed. She thought she saw someone behind her, just for a second, but the elevator was empty. That night, she couldn't help herself. She stood in front of the sealed door with a flashlight and a pencil in hand. The markings weren't random. They curved in loops, crossing over each other in almost ritualistic symmetry. Faint outlines of Hanja, the old Chinese characters once used in Korea, peeked through the paint. She traced them lightly with her pencil, not to disturb whatever dust still clung to them. And in the center of the door, if it was a door, was a small crack, just barely visible, like a seam. She pressed her ear to it. Nothing. And then, a whisper, so soft she almost missed it, but it wasn't in Korean. It wasn't in any language she recognized. It was a cadence, a rhythm, a voice speaking from waterlogged lungs. She stumbled back.
The flashlight flickered. Her phone, fully charged an hour ago, now read 1%. She ran to the living room and sat in silence, listening. No footsteps, no more whispering, just her own breath and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The next morning, she walked 2 blocks to the nearest hardware store and bought a hammer and a crowbar, just in case.
Jian didn't sleep the next night. She tried. Headphones in, white noise playing, a lavender-scented sleep patch pressed to her wrist, but her body refused. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the door in the hallway watching her. Not just existing, not just being there, but watching, waiting, like a stage light in a dark theater, fixed on her with a patience that stretched beyond time. By sunrise, her eyes were dry and heavy, but she was wide awake, mind humming, hands twitching. She sat at her sketch desk and opened a fresh pad of textured paper, not because she had an idea, because something inside her needed to draw. She didn't choose the shapes. She didn't plan the lines. Her pencil moved like it remembered something she didn't. First came the circle, a wide, uneven ring. Then came teeth, faces with mouths wide open but no eyes. Symbols she didn't understand, layered in spirals around the edges. And at the center, always a door. Not a full door, a seam, a crack, a barely there boundary. Each sketch was slightly different, but the feeling was the same. Whatever was behind that door wanted out, but more than that, it wanted her to see it. Jian flipped back through the drawings, flipping faster and faster, until she stopped on the last page. The face she'd drawn, the one that had come in her dream, now stared back at her. Only this time, the eyes were open, wide, alert, and they were looking at her. She dropped the pencil. By noon, she'd made a decision. She pulled on her heaviest hoodie, gloves, and a surgical mask. She didn't want dust getting into her lungs. Then she took the crowbar and the hammer from behind the kitchenette, walked to the sealed outline in the hallway, and stood there in silence. "Just concrete," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. She began tapping the crowbar against the surface, listening for any variation in sound. Thud, thud, clink. There, one panel was hollow, just barely. She started to dig. The paint chipped first, brittle under the edge of the crowbar. Then the plaster beneath cracked like a brittle shell. White dust spilled onto her gloves in the floor. Behind the thin facade was not a wall. It was a door, a real one. Old wood, warped from time, with a round metal knob that had been broken off and filled with cement. A single maintenance light bulb flickered dimly above it, like someone had once installed lighting for this space, then tried to forget it existed. And etched into the surface of the door was a mark, a sharp, angular sigil, deep enough to scar the grain. Jian backed away, breath caught in her chest. The sealed door was real. But why was it hidden? She didn't open it that day. Instead, she packed her things and spent the night in a jjimjilbang, a public bathhouse that never closed. As she lay on the heated floor with a thin blanket and a borrowed locker pillow, she listened to the soft breathing of strangers sleeping nearby and felt something she hadn't felt in days: safe. But even here, the dreams found her. Concrete walls, flickering lights, the room with no furniture, only a mirror in the far wall. She stood in front of it with sketchbook in hand and drew her own face, only it wasn't hers. The features shifted, her jaw thinned, her cheeks hollowed, her skin grayed. Her eyes blinked independently in the mirror,
while her real eyes stayed frozen open. The reflection smiled first, then it whispered, "Almost ready." She woke, gasping. She didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, Gio returned to the officetel just after sunrise. Her heart sank when she reached the 5th floor. The wall was smooth again. No cracks, no chipped paint, no wooden door, just blank concrete and perfect white plaster. She reached out, touched it, and her fingers passed through air. The door was still there. She just couldn't see it anymore. Whatever she had uncovered, it didn't want to be found, not until it was ready. And yet she knew it hadn't been a dream. There were dust particles on the floor, a single piece of broken plaster under her shoe, a streak of gray on the crowbar she'd left by the entrance, and worse, her sketch pad. The final page now showed her standing in front of the mirror again, but this time, the reflection had turned its back. That evening, Jian heard a knock on her door. She froze. No one ever visited her here. No packages, no deliveries, no neighbors had even introduced themselves. She looked through the peephole. An old woman stood outside, wrapped in a brown shawl and holding a bundle of green herbs in a tied cloth. Her face was lined, unreadable. Jian opened the door a crack. "Are you the new girl in 5A?" asked the woman, her voice steady, low. "Yes." The woman held up the bundle. "Burn this every night. Keep the windows closed." Jian hesitated. "Why?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something else, a worn photograph. It showed Unit 5A, same layout, same walls, same hallway. But the photo was old, sepia-toned, and in it, a woman stood just outside the door Jian had uncovered, the one that supposedly didn't exist. She wore a ceremonial robe and a thick white blindfold. Behind her, red symbols were freshly painted on the floor in a perfect ring. A shaman lived here once. She kept something trapped in the mirror. Jian stared. Why? Because it wouldn't leave. Because it wanted out. Because it needed someone to look at it. The woman's eyes locked on hers. Don't look into the mirror. Not fully. Not for too long. And then she turned and walked away. Jian frozen for a long time before she shut the door. That night she burned the herbs. They smelled bitter, something between pine and ash, and filled the room with a dense smoke. She drew the curtains closed and unplugged every device. No screens, no glass, no reflections. But in the darkness, the apartment didn't feel empty. She sat with her back to the hallway, ears straining, and then, faintly, she heard it again. Breathing, measured, soft, coming from behind the invisible door. And then the floor creaked. She turned her head slowly. Her reflection had returned, not in a mirror, but faintly, projected on the blank wall where the door used to be. It showed her sitting exactly as she was, except her reflection was smiling. And behind the reflection stood a second figure, shadowed, still, waiting. Jae-yoon didn't open her curtains the next morning. She didn't want to see her reflection in the window glass, not after what she saw the night before. She moved quietly around her apartment, careful not to let her gaze linger on the hallway. Even in daylight, the corner near the sealed door seemed darker, cooler, like it held its own separate temperature or time. She didn't feel alone anymore. Not truly. She could feel the presence now. It didn't touch her, didn't speak, but it was there, watching. From behind the wall, or from the sketch pad that now refused to stay closed. Her hands trembled when she picked up the pencil again. She didn't want to draw. She didn't. But the moment she tried to do anything else, scroll her phone, open a book, wash dishes, the pull returned. Not physical, not external. Something in her bones, in the parts of her that had been an artist long before she had ever learned the word. She gave in. This time, she didn't draw a face. She drew the room, the concrete chamber, the bare bulb, the mirror, the exact angle of the shadows, and in the mirror's reflection, a detail she hadn't remembered before, were symbols on the floor. Circles, layered rings surrounding the base of the mirror like protective chains. Red paint. No, red powder, like cinnabar. She flipped back to an earlier page. One of the earlier sketches had the same markings, half-formed, almost instinctively drawn. She hadn't noticed, hadn't recognized the pattern. Now she did. The red circles were not decoration. They were containment. Ji-yoon shoved back from the desk and stood, dizzy. She needed answers, not dreams, not hallucinations. She needed facts, something real. And that meant starting with the building itself. The property management office was 2 blocks away, tucked between a 24-hour convenience store and a laundromat that played trot music too loud for too early. A clerk in a navy blue vest and thick glasses sat behind the desk, typing slowly with 2 fingers. Jae-yoon cleared her throat. "Hi, sorry to bother you. I just moved into Unit 5A. I was hoping to take a look at the original floor plans, just out of curiosity." The clerk blinked at her, his expression flat. "Why?" "I'm an illustrator," she lied, "doing a small piece on Seoul housing architecture. I love old officetel layouts. I wanted to see how the building changed after renovations." A pause. Then the clerk sighed, stood, and walked slowly to a metal cabinet in the corner. He opened it with a key, thumbed through a series of thin folders, and returned with a manila envelope labeled in pencil, Building A, Units 5A to 5F, 2003 Original Plan. He slid it across the desk. "Be careful, these are the only copies." Jae-yoon nodded and opened it slowly. The blueprint was clean, minimalistic. 5 units on the top floor. 5A was at the far end of the hall, as expected. Kitchenette, closet, bathroom, main room. 1 window, 1 entry. Nothing else. But something was off. The measurements didn't match her space. Not exactly. There was an extra meter of dead space along the back wall, unaccounted for. No label, no structural column, just void. She pointed at it. "Is this a mistake?" The clerk squinted. "Huh. Never noticed that before." He turned the page, another blueprint, this time after the 2009 remodel. The extra meter was gone, shrunk, covered by thickened walls. Still, no added labels, no storage, no notes. "Sometimes," the clerk muttered, "they just wall off useless areas. Easier than re-engineering the whole layout. Saves cost, hides damage." "Damage?" He shrugged. "Old buildings have history." Jae-yoon felt a chill behind her ribs. "Did anyone else ever report strange things in 5A?" The clerk stopped typing. He didn't answer. On her way back, Jae-yoon noticed something else. The hallway carpet on her floor was different from the others. Slightly newer, slightly darker, replaced more recently. She crouched down and lifted a corner near the end, just to check. There it was. Faint red smudges beneath the edge, worn down and scrubbed. Not paint, powder. still clinging to the tile grout, almost impossible to see unless you were looking. The red circles from her drawings, from her dreams, from the mirror, they had been real, drawn on this floor, in front of the sealed door. She stood, heart pounding as the hallway light above her flickered. One buzz, then silence. She didn't wait. She ran back inside and bolted the door. That night, Jae-yoon didn't dream. Instead, she woke up, but couldn't move. Her body was paralyzed, her chest frozen. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, while the rest of her refused to respond. Something was in the room with her. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. Not standing, hovering, breathing. The sound came from the hallway, then closer, a soft dragging of something heavy across the floor. Then the sensation of pressure, as if something large and invisible had settled onto her chest, holding her down. She tried to scream. Nothing came. A flicker. The mirror on her desk across the room reflected a shape. Not her, not a person. Something gray, crawling. Something smiling. And then, like a snapped thread, she gasped, jolting up, soaked in sweat, heart hammering like it wanted to break out of her chest. The lights were off, but the hallway bulb was flickering again. She got up, shaking, and grabbed her phone. She didn't call anyone. She didn't know who to call. Instead, she pulled out her sketchbook and did the only thing her hand still knew how to do. She drew the red circles. She drew the powder. And in the middle, she drew a mirror, framed in black charcoal, a reflection showing nothing until the last pencil stroke. A hand, pressed against the glass, not reaching out, but beckoning. By the fourth night, Ji-yoon no longer questioned whether she was being haunted. She only wondered how long it had been going on, and why her. The drawings had changed. She didn't remember sketching them, yet each morning they were there. Whole pages filled with images she couldn't explain. Lines drawn in her own style, but not from her hand. No memory, no process, only finished pages left on her desk, her bed, her kitchen counter. Charcoal dust smudged on her fingertips when she woke. The drawings no longer showed the sealed door. They showed what was behind it. Each one offered a deeper glimpse into the hidden room, the concrete chamber she now knew wasn't imagined. One image showed the mirror, lit by a bare bulb swinging overhead. Another showed someone standing in front of it, arms limp, eyes empty. Their reflection, however, was smiling. But the worst drawing appeared on the fifth morning. A close-up of her own face as seen from inside the mirror, as if the spirit had drawn her. And behind her, just out of focus, was a second face, grinning, mouth too wide, eyes too dark, neck bent at an unnatural angle. Ji-yoon didn't leave the apartment that day. She covered every reflective surface she could find, the microwave door, her phone screen, the black gloss finish on the closet, even her laptop. She used masking tape and old newspaper, anything to block the thing from looking back. The only surface she didn't touch was the blank wall where the sealed door had been. She thought of moving out, packing up, leaving everything behind, but the idea brought a wave of nausea. Not fear, guilt, like leaving would be a betrayal, like she was already too far in to run now. She didn't understand that feeling, but it was real. So she stayed. That night, the dreams didn't come softly. They slammed into her the moment she closed her eyes. She stood in the hidden room, barefoot on cold concrete, charcoal pencil in hand. The mirror was massive now, stretched floor to ceiling, edge to edge. She was drawing on it, sketching from the inside. She didn't see herself in the glass. She saw him, the figure, the thing, the presence. At first, he looked like a man, maybe, tall, draped in shadow, his face hidden behind long hair that clung to his cheeks like damp threads. But the longer she looked, the more wrong it became. His arms were too long. His mouth never moved, but she could hear him inside her head. Finish it. Her hand moved against the mirror, sketching symbols, spirals, circles again, always the circles. She tried to stop, but the hand wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to something else, and it was using her like a vessel. And then, the mirror cracked. Not shattered, just one line straight down the center, like something on the other side had pressed too hard against the glass. Ji-yoon screamed. She awoke with a jolt. The sound caught in her throat and stumbled out of bed, knocking over her glass of water. The cup shattered, water spilling across the floor. And there in the puddle was her reflection. Not her real one. This one smiled. Morning came slowly. The clouds outside were a heavy, sick gray. Rain tapped against the windows like knuckles. Ji-yoon didn't bother dressing. She wore the same sweatshirt from the day before, the same socks, the same silence in her chest. She sat at the desk and flipped through the drawings again. More pages had appeared. She didn't remember drawing them. One showed her own hand holding a pencil, with the reflection in the mirror holding something else, a shard of broken glass. Another showed the mirror cracked open, something crawling out of it on all fours. No face, just hair, long, wet, stringy. Every sketch pulled her deeper. Every image felt like a memory, not a vision. Like the spirit wasn't showing her what it wanted. It was reminding her of something she already knew. That thought unsettled her more than any shadow or whisper ever had. She closed the sketchbook. And then the lights went out. All of them. A low hum buzzed through the walls. Not mechanical, not electric. It sounded like chanting. Low, monotone, distant. She followed it barefoot into the hallway. The sealed door was visible again. This time without any paint, no plaster, no cover. Just the raw wooden door, old and cracked, marked with red rings, now glowing faintly like coals buried under ash. And the mirror inside was glowing too, not with light, but with want. She stepped closer, and the breathing behind the door quickened. Her phone vibrated, once. She looked down. A notification blinked on her screen. Battery 1%, charging blocked by unknown source. She backed away slowly, her heart in her throat. She needed to leave now, but her legs didn't move. Something held her in place, not physically, but emotionally, like being anchored by grief or guilt or a secret you're not allowed to speak out loud. Suddenly, the door knocked. Once. Then again. Then 3 times. Slow. Purposeful. Rhythmic. Ji-yoon pressed her hands over her ears, breathing fast, her pulse wild, but the knocking didn't stop. Not until she whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. Then, from behind the door, a voice like cracked glass. "A mirror is only closed when someone draws it shut from inside." Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, trembling, teeth clenched so tight her jaw hurt. She stayed there for hours. She didn't remember falling asleep. But when she opened her eyes, the door was gone again. Only smooth plaster remained, as if nothing had ever been there. Except this time, a sketch lay beside her. It showed her sleeping, curled in the hallway, and behind her, standing in the open doorway, the figure waited, head bent, eyes glowing, hand raised, waving.
The next morning, Ji-yoon didn't check her phone. She didn't brush her teeth. She didn't eat. She sat in silence, staring at the sketch left beside her in the hallway. The sketch she didn't draw. It was too detailed to be a dream, too intentional. Her curled body was rendered perfectly. Even the fold of her sweatshirt sleeve, the tangle of her hair. But the figure behind her, it had changed. The grin was gone. The eyes were hollow, sunken, no longer mocking. It wasn't him. It was her. A woman, slender, draped in shadowed fabric, hair like ink soaked in water. Her expression was not evil, not twisted. It was tired. She looked like someone who had been trapped far too long. And for the first time, Ji-yoon wondered if the mirror wasn't simply a prison, but a burial, a tomb, a forgotten ritual sealed away behind fresh paint and cheap rent. She traced the lines of the figure's face with her fingertip. There was sorrow in the charcoal, something ancient, something human. And suddenly, Ji-yoon felt her fear shift. What if this wasn't a haunting? What if it was a plea? She opened the sketchpad to a new page and sat at the desk, the sunlight behind her pale and dim. She didn't try to draw what she saw. She drew what she felt. Her pencil moved slowly, not from panic, but instinct. The lines were smoother this time, controlled, not automatic like before. She drew a woman kneeling before a mirror, both hands pressed against the glass. In the reflection, the same woman mirrored her, except her mouth was open, as if whispering something the real-world version couldn't hear. She leaned in, heart quickening. She shaded in the corners, added faint lines to the lips, outlined the jaw. When she finished, she closed the sketchbook, placed it in front of the hallway wall, and stepped back. "I'm listening," she said softly. Nothing happened, but that night, the mirror responded. In her dream, she was in the room again, but it felt warmer now. Not safe, but less hostile. The light bulb above flickered, casting shadows on the far wall. The mirror stood before her, larger than ever, like a doorway that forgot how to be a wall. She walked toward it, not afraid, not sure, just drawn. The woman was already there, standing on the other side. Her eyes were dark, but not empty. Her face was still, almost regal in its calm. She didn't speak with her mouth. She spoke through images. The mirror fogged over like condensation, and behind it, Ji-yoon saw flashes. A younger version of the woman in a ceremonial robe, red powder in her hands, a circle drawn on the floor of the same room Ji-yoon had uncovered. A man, twisted, screaming, bound in front of the mirror. A ritual interrupted, blood smeared across the glass. Then silence, the woman turning toward the mirror with resolve, pressing both palms to the glass and stepping inside. The reflection shifted back to present. Now she was trapped, waiting, watching. She hadn't haunted the apartment. She had protected it, until Ji-yoon broke the seal, until she was seen again. And now, the unfinished ritual demanded completion. Not through fire, not through violence, through replacement. Ji-yoon jolted awake just before dawn. She sat upright, heart racing, the images still burning behind her eyes. She remembered everything. The woman had been a mudang, a Korean shaman, the last one to live in Unit 5A. She had sealed away a malicious spirit, a malevolent soul drawn to reflective surfaces, capable of feeding on obsession,
self-image, vanity. It had attached itself to people who stared too long into mirrors, whispering thoughts until they weren't sure who they were anymore. The shaman had tried to trap it, but it had turned on her, forced her to finish the ritual from the wrong side. And now, decades later, Ji-yoon had broken the boundary, not by violence, not by force, but by drawing her, by giving the spirit form again, a face, a story. And in so doing, she had reopened the door. The next few days blurred. Ji-yoon stopped leaving the apartment. She didn't answer messages. She drew constantly, scenes she'd never witnessed, faces she didn't recognize, fragments of the shaman's life bleeding into her fingertips. There were pages and pages of rituals, red powder, ceremonial bells, mirrored bowls filled with oil and smoke. She started sketching the mirror again, but this time it was different. Instead of sealing it, her drawings showed her entering it. Some part of her knew what that meant. The ritual required a vessel, someone to stand inside the mirror, someone to replace the soul that had guarded it, someone to close the door from within. She tried to resist the idea, told herself it was madness, that it wasn't real. But every time she looked into a reflection, even a drop of water, she saw the woman watching her, patient, gentle, not demanding, asking. And somewhere inside, Ji-yoon felt the answer forming. Maybe this wasn't about fear. Maybe it was about purpose. That night, she lit a single candle in the hallway. She sat cross-legged in front of the wall, and she began to draw again. This time, she wasn't sketching from visions. She was recreating the red circles, the containment marks, from memory, from instinct, line after line, symbol after symbol. The air around her grew thick, heavy with heat and silence. When the final ring was complete, she opened her sketchbook to a blank page, and for the first time, she invited the woman to draw. "I'm ready," she whispered. A cold wind passed through the hallway, though no windows were open. And then, without warning, the light bulb above the hallway door flickered and went out. In the dark, Ji-yoon smiled. The mirror had opened, and the woman was waiting. The following morning, Ji-yoon awoke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the floor. She blinked into the dim light. Her neck ached. Her arms were stiff. She had fallen asleep in the hallway again, curled in the center of the red rings she'd drawn the night before. The candle had long since burned out. Her phone buzzed again. She reached for it. Battery, 97%. She hadn't charged it. She hadn't even touched it. A notification blinked across the screen. Screen time this week, 0 minutes. Drawing time this week, 63 hours. June stared. That wasn't possible. The app didn't track sketchbooks, only digital use. She checked the time, 4:14 a.m. But when she blinked, it shifted. 9:52 p.m., then back to 4:14 a.m. And then the phone died. Battery 0%. She didn't panic. She was too far past panic now. This had become something else, a slow unraveling, a quiet descent into a place where logic didn't operate the way it used to, where electronics failed, where reflections behaved like windows, where time was suggested, not measured. She stood slowly and looked at the blank wall. The door wasn't visible, but she could hear it again, the sound she'd come to dread and almost accept. Breathing, soft, slow, like someone asleep just on the other side. And beneath that, quieter still, scratching. She moved through the apartment with purpose that morning, not frantic, deliberate. She opened drawers, found old incense sticks, stored tea lights, and her last unused roll of black charcoal. She needed to prepare, not for a confrontation, for a crossing. But first, she had to understand what it meant. The woman in the mirror hadn't forced her, hadn't manipulated her. She had only shown Ji-yoon truth, and Ji-yoon had seen something no one else would have seen. The artist in her had always sought beauty in the unseen. Now she was being asked to become part of it. But even so, a question lingered. Why her? Why not someone else in the building? Why not the neighbor across the hall, the man on the third floor? Why Ji-yoon? She needed answers, and the only person who might know was the old woman who had knocked on her door. It took 3 hours and 6 false starts, but she eventually found her, 2 buildings down, on the 2nd floor, in a unit filled with drying herbs, faded talismans, and the thick, musty scent of burnt salt. The woman didn't seem surprised to see her. "You saw her," she said without looking up. "Yes, I saw her. I know what she is." The woman nodded slowly. "Not what? Who? She has a name. Do you know it?" The old woman poured tea. "Names are power. You shouldn't say them aloud. But yes, I knew her." Ji-yoon waited. "She was my sister," the woman said softly. "Long ago, before the building was new, when this land still remembered the forest that once stood here." Ji-yoon's breath caught. "She was born seeing too much. Spirits spoke to her when she was a child. Mirrors were especially dangerous for her. They showed her things no one else could see." Why did she trap herself? She didn't plan to. She meant to trap it, the thing that came through her reflection, a spirit of hunger, born from human vanity. But it was clever. It twisted the ritual, and the mirror took her instead. The woman's eyes met Ji-yoon's. She's not evil, but she is trapped, and that kind of silence warps a soul. Ji-yoon swallowed. "She wants me to finish the ritual." The woman nodded once. "Yes, and if you don't, it will find another way out." Ji-yoon looked at her hands. "Will I be trapped like her?" "No." That answer came quickly. "You are not the vessel. You are the mirror. She chose you because you can reflect. You can hold what others turn away from." She didn't fully understand, but part of her already believed. She returned to the apartment just after sundown. Everything felt wrong. The air was too still. Her footsteps made no sound. Even the hum of electricity, that faint background noise she'd never noticed before, had vanished. The apartment had felt like it had slipped between layers of time. She moved down the hallway and stopped. The door was back. Only now, it was open. Not wide, just a sliver, enough to show the room beyond. Concrete walls, a bare floor, and in the far wall, the mirror, glowing faintly in the dark like moonlight trapped in glass. Ji-yoon stepped forward. No hesitation, no fear, just silence. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman was already there, and this time, she was closer than ever. Their eyes met, and then the woman reached out, palm pressed flat to the glass. Ji-yoon did the same. The contact was ice, not cold, emptiness, like touching a shadow that remembered being real. And then, for the first time, the woman spoke. Not voice from her mouth, but from Ji-yoon's own mind. "Thank you for seeing me." And with that, the mirror breathed. It inhaled, drawing in air, dust, time, memory, and Ji-yoon stepped forward, not into the mirror, into herself. The glass did not shatter. It closed, quietly, as if a wound had finally healed. And the hallway light dimmed, and the door, that impossible door, vanished for the last time. When Ji-yoon awoke the next morning, the apartment felt different, lighter. She stood slowly and walked the length of the hallway. There was no outline, no breath, no whisper, just blank concrete, warm with sunlight. Her sketchbook lay on the desk. The last page showed her, standing in front of the mirror, her reflection finally aligned, identical. No grin, no shadow, just her. And beneath the sketch, a single line had been written: "The mirror is closed."
For the first time in weeks, Ji-yoon slept without dreams. No concrete walls, no whispering mirrors, no sketches left behind in someone else's hand. Just silence, soft, uninterrupted, and unburdened. She woke slowly, blinking into the pale light filtering through the windows. The apartment felt still, neutral, like it had forgotten everything, like it had never been haunted, never been sealed, never held a door that didn't exist. The hallway was bare. No breathing behind the wall, no flickering lights, no trace of red circles or charcoal dust. It was over. Ji-yoon let herself believe that for most of the morning. She made tea, opened the windows, even played soft music from her phone, which now charged normally. No glitches, no drained batteries, no shadows in the screen. Peace felt foreign in her bones, but she welcomed it anyway. By afternoon, she sat at her desk, opened her sketchbook, and turned to the last drawing, the one she remembered clearly, herself and the woman in the mirror, hands pressed together. Below the sketch, the words still remained: "The mirror is closed." She smiled faintly, touched the paper, and then something strange happened. The ink rippled, just a little, a flutter, like a tremor beneath the page. She blinked, pressed her palm flat to the drawing. Nothing. She lifted her hand again. The ink shimmered. No, not shimmered, moved. The outline of the mirror on the page quivered, barely perceptible, like a reflection disturbed by breath. Ji-yoon leaned in, heart slowing. She brought her face close to the page, close enough to smell the graphite, the paper, the memory of her own hand. The sketch of her reflection blinked. Ji-yoon recoiled, her chair scraping backward, her breath caught in her throat. She looked again. The image was still, exactly as she had left it. But now, her reflection was smiling. She closed the sketchbook and backed away slowly. "No, we finished it! We closed it!" The apartment was silent, but something inside her stirred. Not fear, but doubt. What if it hadn't ended? What if the door was gone, but the mirror never needed it? She tried to leave the apartment, grabbed her keys, her bag, slipped on her shoes, but the moment her hand touched the doorknob, a sharp pulse ran up her arm, like static shock, but deeper, into bone. She let go immediately, looked down at her fingers. The skin beneath her nails was stained black, not ink, something thicker, oily, like liquid charcoal. She ran to the bathroom, scrubbed with soap and water until her knuckles turned red. The stains faded, but when she looked in the mirror above the sink,
Her reflection wasn't moving. She blinked. It didn't. She raised her hand. It stayed still. Her throat closed in panic. Then, after a long delay, the reflection caught up, slowly, dragging, as if waking up. Ji-yoon backed away. Her knees trembled. She grabbed a towel and covered the mirror. And in that muffled silence, she heard something move in the sketchbook, still lying open on the desk. A page turned itself. She didn't draw for the rest of the day. She sat curled on the couch, eyes fixed on the blank wall across the room. No reflections, no paper, just solid, unmoving light. But something had changed. She could feel it. The woman in the mirror was gone. That much was true. The sadness, the pleading, it had vanished. But the space she left behind, the echo, the hollow, had not. It had made room for something else, something less patient, something that didn't ask to be seen, but had already watched her long enough to know how to imitate. That night, Ji-yoon placed the sketchbook in a drawer and taped it shut. She placed her pencil in the freezer, unplugged her tablet, covered every reflective surface in the apartment. Then she tried to sleep. But sometime after midnight, she awoke to the soft scrape of paper being turned. She sat up slowly. The drawer was closed. The tape was intact. But the sound came again. Another page, turning. And then, the gentle scratch of pencil on paper. Her breath caught. She crept toward the desk, her heartbeat slow and heavy. The sound stopped before she reached it. She peeled the tape away and opened the drawer. The sketchbook was closed, but when she opened it, the newest page showed something impossible. It was her, lying in bed, eyes wide open, and above her, crouched on the ceiling, a figure drawn in violent strokes, thin-limbed, grinning, watching. She turned the page. The next sketch was of the hallway. The mirror was back, wide open, and someone, not her, was standing inside it, beckoning with a hand made entirely of shadows. She slammed the book shut. This wasn't the woman anymore. This was something else, something that had slipped through behind her, something that had used the ritual not to escape, but to sneak in while the seal was weak. The woman had trapped the spirit once, but Ji-yoon had opened the way again. And now, the spirit was not trying to replace her. It was becoming her. By copying, by watching, by drawing its way out. The next morning, her front door was unlocked. She knew she had locked it. Her tea mug was half full. She hadn't made tea. And on her bedroom wall, written in sweeping charcoal script, was a phrase: "Finish the drawing." She ran, out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the street. She didn't stop until her lungs burned and her legs shook. She made it as far as a small cafe 5 blocks away before she collapsed into a seat and cried. The server brought her water. She couldn't stop shaking. Her reflection in the cafe window smiled faintly back at her. But she wasn't smiling, not even a little. The cafe felt like a sanctuary, not because it was warm, not because of the low chatter or the hiss of milk frothing behind the counter, but because the windows had blinds, because the spoons were dull, because there were no mirrors. Ji-yoon stayed until her hands stopped shaking, until her thoughts formed full sentences again, until she could breathe without hearing the scratch of pencil on paper. Then she knew what she had to do. She needed to go back, not to Unit 5A, not yet, to the 3rd floor, to the only person who knew what this really was. The door was already open when she arrived. The hallway smelled of herbs and smoke, thicker than before, almost acrid, like something had burned overnight and wasn't quite finished smoldering. The old woman stood in the doorway, holding a bundle of dried plants wrapped in white string. "You're late," she said softly. Ji-yoon didn't argue. The woman stepped aside and let her in. Inside, the walls were lined with charms, real ones, not the factory-printed talismans from temple gift shops, but hand-painted scrolls smeared with ash and red ink. There were bowls of salt in every corner, bells tied to the curtain rods, a mirror covered with black cloth and bound in rope. Ji-yoon stood very still. "I thought it was over," she whispered. "But it's not." The woman didn't look surprised. "They never truly leave. Spirits like this, they don't want freedom. They want reflection. They want eyes, attention, witness." Ji-yoon sat slowly at the low table. "It's using my hands," she said, "drawing while I sleep, while I look away." The woman nodded. "Because it knows you. It's learned your rhythms. Your art is its voice now." Ji-yoon looked down at her palms. "I thought the woman, your sister, was protecting the mirror." "She was, but when you opened the door, even for the right reasons, it let something else in." Ji-yoon met her gaze. "What is it?" The woman was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, voice hushed. "It's called a bansingui, a reflection ghost. They're rare, born not from death, but from obsession. They aren't spirits of people. They're spirits of identity, vanity, memory." Ji-yoon frowned. "Not people?" The woman shook her head. "No, they come from what people see in themselves, the part they fear, or the part they worship. Over time, mirrors begin to remember those things, not the person, but the feeling. And if enough of those feelings gather in one place," Ji-yoon whispered, "it becomes something." The woman nodded. "A watcher, a mimic, a thing that learns you by looking through you." Ji-yoon closed her eyes. The sketches, the delay in her reflection, the smile that came when hers didn't. "It's trying to become me. It already has." She barely made it home before nightfall. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the hallway as she reached her floor. She hesitated outside the door to 5A, listening. Silence. No scratching. No breath. But she didn't trust it. When she stepped inside, the air felt heavy, not with malice, but expectation, like the room had been holding its breath, waiting for her return. Nothing looked out of place until she saw the sketchbook. It was open, pages fluttering, not from wind, but something unseen. Each page showed her, different poses, different expressions, but none of them were real. They were versions, iterations, attempts. Each face was close, but not quite right, as if the thing inside the pages was trying to replicate her, over and over, until it became her. She flipped to the last drawing. This one was new. A mirror, cracked, and inside it, two versions of her. One with a blindfold, one with no eyes at all, and a caption in smudged charcoal below. "Only one can stay." That night she did not sleep. Instead, she laid out salt in a circle around her bed, placed the old woman's herbs in the corners of the room, covered the smoke detectors, and lit a single white candle. Then she sat in the center of the salt ring, and she waited. Just after midnight, it came. First, the sound, the soft drag of charcoal across paper. Then the air, heavy and wrong, as if the room were being filled with a weight that had no source. Then, the mirror opened. The pages turned slowly, as if guided by invisible fingers. Ji-yoon didn't move. And then, the final page revealed itself. It was her again, but this time she was split. One half smiling, the other crying. Both versions reaching toward a mirror that had no reflection. A single line was written in the corner. Finish what she could not. The room grew colder. The flame of the candle stretched sideways, as if reaching toward the hallway. And in the silence, Ji-yoon heard her own voice. Not aloud, not imagined. Her voice from inside her own head, saying something she didn't mean. "I'm ready." She covered her mouth, but the room already believed her. The mirror was waking up again, and this time, it was hungry.
Ji-yoon didn't leave the circle of salt until sunrise. She sat in complete silence, legs folded, body still, while the apartment held its breath around her. The candle flickered low, burned nearly to the base, casting strange shadows across the walls. The sketchbook remained closed, but she could still feel it, the presence. Not loud, not violent, just waiting, like a predator who had already marked its prey. By morning, she knew what she had to do. She returned to the 3rd floor. The old woman opened the door before she knocked, eyes sharp, as if she too had not slept. "I need the ritual," Ji-yoon said. The woman stepped aside without a word and handed her a scroll. Thin rice paper, brittle at the edges, bound with red thread. "This was my sister's," she said. "It's incomplete, but you'll know what's missing." Ji-yoon took the scroll with both hands, bowing slightly. "I think it's me," she whispered. "I think I'm what's missing." The old woman nodded. "Not just you," she said. "Your choice." Back in Unit 5A, Ji-yoon unrolled the scroll across her desk. The writing was old but clear, brushstrokes bold and deliberate, a ritual of sealing. It described the preparation: salt, smoke, symbols, mirrors cleansed with sacred water. It detailed a chant, phonetic syllables meant to call forth the spirit and bind it within the reflective plane. But halfway through, the ink faded. The words grew frantic, smudged, incomplete. The last full line read, "When the spirit begins to imitate, destroy the image." Ji-yoon stared at those words for a long time. Not banish, not exorcise, not trap. Destroy. Not the spirit, the image. The one the spirit had copied. It had drawn it over and over, trying to become her. And suddenly, she understood. The Bansin Gui didn't just want to be seen. It wanted to exist. It wanted to become a perfect mirror, to wear her identity, her face, her habits, until no one could tell the difference, not even Ji-yoon herself. But it could only become real if the image was allowed to live. And she had drawn that image, again and again. She had fed it. The sketchbook lay quiet on the desk, closed, innocent. But Ji-yoon knew better now. She reached for it slowly, then stopped. Instead, she walked to the kitchenette and pulled out a small ceramic bowl. She filled it with salt, then with water. Then she lit a stick of the old woman's herbs and waved the smoke over the bowl. Purification, just like the scroll said. Then she sat cross-legged in the center of the room and opened the sketchbook. The pages turned faster this time, like something inside had been waiting for her touch. Each drawing looked more like her now, not stylized, not abstract,
Real. Too real. Movements captured in perfect detail. Her brushing her hair, her eating, her sleeping, her dreaming. But one page in particular made her freeze. It was her, at the desk, right now, wearing the same shirt, sitting in the exact same posture. And behind her, in the drawing, stood another version of her, smiling, shadowed, hands hovering over her head like a puppeteer. She tore the page out. The paper screamed, not in sound, but in feeling. A sharp jolt behind her eyes, her vision blurred. She dipped the page into the saltwater bowl. The ink bled immediately, the face melting, the shadows dissolving into gray swirls. The air shifted. The room groaned, like the walls seeming to tighten, like the space itself was trying to recoil. She turned to the next drawing. Another version, this one standing in the hallway, waving from the mirror. She ripped it out, dipped it. Another wave of pressure struck her chest, like something enormous had been punched. The candle flared, and from the hallway came the sound of running footsteps. But they didn't lead away. They rushed toward her. She tore the third page, then the fourth, and each one she submerged into the salt water, watching the ink disappear. The spirit wasn't screaming, it was fighting and losing. Page after page, Ji-yoon destroyed them. Each time the room shook harder, each time her hands trembled more. The mirror reappeared on the hallway wall, not physically, but visually, like an overlay of light and memory, faint, flickering, just enough to reflect her now. But in the reflection, she was smiling. Only she wasn't. Her real face, her body was frozen in focus, but the mirrored version grinned wider with every destroyed image. And then it spoke. Her voice, her tone, but not her. If you erase me, who will you be? Ji-yoon stared. The mirror version leaned forward. You needed me. You made me. You fed me with every sleepless night, every drawing, every glance in the glass. Ji-yoon reached for the final sketch, the one the spirit had never let her see. The first drawing, from the first night she moved in. It was hidden, tucked between the covers. She pulled it out. It showed her standing in front of the sealed door. No sketchbook, no pencil, just her, alone, looking scared, looking hollow. And in the reflection of the door, in the polished knob, was a second face, smiling. It had been there from the beginning. The spirit hadn't entered later. It had entered with her. Ji-yoon pressed her hand to the sketch. It felt warm, alive. The reflection in the hallway mirror whispered, "Don't destroy me. You'll lose everything I gave you." Ji-yoon dipped the final drawing into the salt water. And for the first time, the mirror cracked. A loud, shattering sound, glass bending inward, not outward. And then, silence. Heavy, profound, complete. The mirror faded. The light returned. And the sketchbook was blank. Every page, clean, pure, like it had never been touched. Ji-yoon sat for hours, unmoving. Her hands were black with ink, her face streaked with tears. But the air was quiet. The presence was gone. And she, for the first time, felt like herself again. No watchers, no reflections, just breath and choice.
The mirror was gone.
No reflections lingered. No hidden smiles waited behind glass. Ji-eun sat in the soft silence of Unit 5A, surrounded by blank pages and pale light. Her ears strained for breath that wasn't hers, but there was nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the muted sounds of life outside the windows. Car horns, distant footsteps, a dog barking 2 streets away. The world had returned to normal, but Ji-eun had not. Her sketchbook was clean, every page empty. Her pencil sharpened, untouched. The ritual scroll returned to the 3rd floor, along with a quiet thank you and a deeper bow. Still, she hadn't drawn in days, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer trusted why she wanted to. On the 3rd day after the final sealing, she received a message from a client, a magazine editor who had been waiting for weeks. "We'd love to feature your work in the next issue. Deadline's tight, but if you have a few pieces ready, we'll take them." Ji-eun stared at the screen. She had nothing. And worse, she wasn't sure she wanted to make anything anymore. What if every drawing was an invitation? What if every face she sketched could become a doorway? What if the act of creating was now forever tied to what she had unsealed? But she couldn't live like this, suspended in fear, paralyzed by memory. So she stood, took a deep breath, and picked up a pencil. She let her hand hover over the page, and she waited, not for possession, not for voices, just for herself. She made a line, then another. The pencil moved slowly, awkward at first, like learning how to walk again after forgetting what legs were for. She drew a tree, just a tree. No mirror, no face, no hallway or circle or hidden doorway, just something that lived. And when she finished, she stared at it for a long time. It didn't move. It didn't smile. It was just a tree. And she cried, not from fear, but from relief. She could still draw. She could still be herself. But she understood something now. Creation is not always safe. Some images demand to be seen. Some reflections never go quietly. And the mirror, even when shattered, remembers what it once held. That night, Ji-eun dreamed. But it wasn't the chamber, it wasn't the spirit. It was the woman, the shaman, the sister. She stood in a field surrounded by tall grass and wind that moved without direction. Her eyes were soft, her hands folded. She said nothing, but Ji-eun understood. The seal had been broken, and that meant it would always be breakable. But now, she knew how to fix it. Now, she knew the cost. In the days that followed, Ji-eun changed. She covered every mirror in her apartment, not out of fear, but out of respect. She stopped posting her art online. She stopped drawing her own face. Instead, she started sketching the invisible, moments between moments, gestures people forget, shadows not tied to fear, but to depth. She no longer drew for recognition. She drew to witness, and that difference changed everything. One morning, she found a small envelope slid under her door. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, sepia-toned. A young woman dressed in ceremonial robes, standing in front of a mirror. It was the shaman, the sister. She turned the photo over. On the back, a line had been written in faded pencil. Some doors must stay closed, not because they are cursed, but because they are listening. She placed the photo in her dresser drawer, not as a warning, but as a memory. Weeks passed, and then one evening, the power flickered, just once. Her phone restarted by itself. Battery 96% to 4% in 2 seconds. A low hum came from the hallway light. Ji-yoon didn't panic. She walked slowly to the end of the hallway. The wall was smooth, no seam, no outline. But she placed her hand there anyway and whispered, without fear, "I see you, but I am not you." The hum stopped. The light stilled. And for the first time since moving into Unit 5A, Ji-yoon turned her back on the wall, and nothing followed.
It happened on a quiet night. No flickering lights, no phantom sketches, no ominous reflections. Just stillness. Ji-yoon had fallen asleep at her desk, a half-finished drawing under her hand, a street corner at dusk, empty, but for the shape of wind in the leaves. It was the first time in weeks that she'd drawn without interruption, without fear. But in sleep, she returned not to the hallway, or the sealed door, or the ritual circle. This time, she went inside. Inside the mirror. Not metaphorically, not in a dreamlike haze. She stood in the chamber. Bare walls, concrete, same space, same weight. But the mirror, once looming, dominating, was now behind her. And before her stood herself. Not a double, not the mimic, but a version of her. Younger, eyes uncertain, arms crossed as if hugging herself. Ji-yoon stared. The younger version looked up. "You left me here," it said softly. The voice wasn't bitter, just disappointed. Ji-yoon took a step forward. "Who are you?" The girl blinked. "You drew me." Ji-yoon's breath caught. "You made me before you ever came here. You made me when you stopped being seen, when you started hiding behind your art. Every sketch, every mirror, every silence. You didn't want to look at yourself, so you made me look for you." Ji-yoon felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know." The girl tilted her head. "Didn't you?" And suddenly Ji-yoon saw them, all around the walls, images, drawings, reflections, not of the spirit, not of the mimic, of herself. Moments she had buried, crying in the bathroom as a teenager, tearing up her first gallery rejection, smiling while lying, saying she was fine, staring at her own face, wondering what it would be like to disappear. These were not hauntings, they were memories, mirror thoughts, not trapped by ritual, but by refusal. She turned back to the girl. "You're me," Ji-yoon whispered. "The part I never wanted to see." The girl nodded. "And the spirit, it fed on that." "Yes," the girl replied. "It became stronger every time you refused to feel." Ji-yoon stepped forward. "What happens now?" The girl's face softened. "You forgive me." Ji-yoon swallowed. Tears burned behind her eyes. She dropped to her knees, arms open. The girl stepped into her. And suddenly, the space folded. The walls blurred. The mirror shimmered behind them and slowly melted into air. And then, Ji-yoon woke up. It was morning, real morning, light pouring in. No chills, no shadows. She sat up at her desk, hands stiff but calm.
The sketch was still there, the street corner, but something new had appeared in the corner of the page. A tiny, barely visible shape of a girl standing by a window, her face turned to the light. Not haunting, not eerie, just honest. Ji-yoon placed her pencil down gently, and for the first time, by choice, she whispered to herself, "I'm here. I see you." Over the next few days, she slept more. She ate full meals. She laughed once, then twice, and felt the sound ring through her body like something she hadn't heard in years. She walked through Seoul without her hood pulled low. She opened her curtains and didn't flinch at the windows. She even uncovered the bathroom mirror. And when she looked into it, she saw only her. Not frozen, not smiling, not delayed. Just her. Tired eyes, softer jaw, a woman who had looked at darkness and didn't look away. A woman who knew now that the real horror had never been ghosts or mirrors. It had been the parts of herself she refused to face. And now she faced them, not with fear, but with compassion. On her final night in Unit 5A, she sat in the hallway one last time. The wall where the sealed door had been was plain, white, silent. She touched it gently. There was no pulse, no breath, only memory. She took a charcoal pencil and, for the first time by choice, drew a single circle on the wall. Not as a trap, not as a seal, but as a reminder, a boundary, a symbol that this space, like her, had held something dark and survived it. Then she stood, packed her bags, and turned off the lights. As she left, she glanced at the apartment one last time. There were no flickers, no shadows, no sounds. But in the corner of the mirror by the elevator, she saw her own face. No one else behind it. Just her. And she smiled. For real this time.
Ji-yoon didn't think she would miss the apartment. And yet, as the days passed, she found herself remembering it more than she wanted to. The softness of the morning light through the windows, the hush of the hallway at night, the faint hum of the city beneath her feet. But mostly, she remembered the silence and how she had finally filled it. She had moved across the river, a quieter neighborhood. No officetels, just low rooftops, trees swaying in courtyard gardens, and neighbors who nodded but didn't ask questions. She rented a small, sunlit studio with no mirrors, and for weeks she lived simply. She drew again, not from dreams or shadows, but from observation. Street vendors, park benches, alley cats napping in plastic crates. Her sketchbook was filled with the ordinary, the overlooked, the human. She felt whole. Until one evening, something arrived in her inbox. The subject line was simple. "Congratulations on your submission to Galleria 2 Seoul." She blinked. She hadn't submitted anything. She opened the email. It was brief. "Your piece, Reflection Study Number 1, has been selected for the upcoming group exhibition Mirrors of the Self. We're thrilled to feature your work. Please confirm attendance for the opening night." Attached was a photo, a painting. Oil on canvas, rough brush strokes, muted palette. A face looking out from the shadows of a mirror. Her face, but not. The expression was too wide, the eyes too deep,
the smile. Ji-yoon's blood turned cold. She hadn't painted this, but it looked exactly like something the spirit would have made. Her finger hovered above the reply button. She hesitated, then clicked delete. But the image stayed with her, even after she closed her laptop, even after she turned off the lights, even after she climbed into bed and wrapped herself in warmth and logic. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was smiling because it had never really left. The next day, she visited the gallery. She told herself it was curiosity, closure, a way to prove to herself that it was just a coincidence. The space was sleek and modern, white walls, soft spotlights, an atmosphere of curated calm. She walked past digital installations, abstract collages, political street art, until she reached the back wall. There it was, her name printed on a plaque. Reflection Study Number 1, Ji-yoon Song. The painting was larger in person, and worse. It was her face, yes, but off, subtly. Skin tone just a little too pale, the lips a little too long, the eyes slightly uneven, and yet somehow perfect in their imperfection. She couldn't look away. It stared back with such knowing, such intimacy, that her chest tightened. It wasn't a portrait. It was a claim. And then, from behind her, a voice. You captured something unnerving. It feels alive. She turned. A woman in a black coat, sipping from a wine glass, smiled politely. Ji-yoon opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to explain, to scream, but no sound came out. She turned and left. She didn't look back. That night, she opened her sketchbook. She hadn't planned to draw. Her hands trembled too much. But when she turned the pages, there it was. The painting, copied in charcoal, perfectly rendered. She hadn't drawn it. She knew she hadn't. And below it, a line scrawled in black smudge. You left the door open. She dropped the sketchbook, backed away. Her heart raced. She turned to the wall where no mirror hung, where nothing had ever hung, and she saw it. Just a glimmer, a shimmer in the air, a flicker of a frame where no frame existed, a boundary she thought she'd sealed. The mirror, the mimic. It had never wanted to be her. It had only wanted to be seen by others. And now it was. Through her name, through her hands, through her absence of refusal. She burned the page that night, in the kitchen sink, under cold water and shaking fingers. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. But when she looked back at her desk, the sketchbook was closed, and a fresh pencil rested beside it, unsharpened, waiting. She turned the book over gently this time. On the cover, someone had scratched a word, one she hadn't seen before. Host. Her fingers went numb. She knew now what the mimic had done. It didn't need a mirror anymore. It had found something better. Art. It didn't need reflection. It needed recognition. And now it was painting itself into the world through galleries, through praise, through strangers who saw it and felt something. And Yoon, without knowing, had given it a name. Hers.
Jiun didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk, watching the sketchbook like it might move again, like it might open on its own, whisper through its pages, or breathe through the charcoal-stained spine. She had burned the mimic's image, destroyed the false face, but something had shifted. It no longer needed the mirror. It had found her name, and through it, a path into the world. It didn't want her body. It wanted her signature. June traced the word scratched into the cover, host. Not a victim, not a prisoner, a vessel, a door, an invitation. She had opened it the first time out of wonder, the second time out of empathy, and now she had to decide. Would she close it by force, or would she trade something of herself to seal it shut forever? By dawn, she knew what she had to do. She took the scroll from its hiding place beneath her mattress, the original sealing ritual, faded but still legible. She read every line again, this time not for knowledge, for instruction. The final lines, once incomplete, now made sense. If the spirit passes beyond the mirror, its image must be pulled back into form and then sealed with a soul that knows it best. Pulled back, drawn, rendered, not exorcised, not banished, captured in the way only she could capture it, through drawing. But this time, not on accident. This time, it had to be perfect. She spent the next 12 hours preparing. First, she visited the gallery. She walked in quietly, alone, during the early hours before visitors arrived. She stood before the painting, her name below it, her face within it, and stared into its eyes. They didn't blink, they didn't smile, but she felt it watching her. She brought a small blade, and with one slow, deliberate motion, she cut the canvas down from the wall. No alarms, no voices, just silence and the rustle of severed thread. She carried it home like a body. Back in her studio, she set the mimic's painting in front of her, leaning it against the far wall. Then she opened her sketchbook. She lit a candle, the same kind she'd used in Unit 5A. She placed a bowl of salt beside her and drew the red circles around her chair, the containment seal, the frame of the ritual. And then she drew, not with fear, not with wonder, with purpose, with memory. She drew every moment she had seen it, every reflection, every whisper, every grin that wasn't hers. She drew the mimic, not just what it looked like, but what it was, how it had slipped into her voice, how it had moved when she didn't, how it had watched through her own eyes when she blinked, line after line, page after page, until, finally, it was done. She sat back, chest heaving, sweat on her neck. The final drawing stared back at her. Not the mimic, not the spirit, not the woman in the mirror, but a single eye, black, slit open in the center of the page, like a wound, watching, waiting, and beneath it, her signature, her real name. Jiun tore the page from the book. She lit the second candle, and she whispered the final words of the ritual, not in the old tongue, but in her own. You are seen, you are drawn, you are sealed. And she pressed the image onto the mimic's painting. A wind rose in the room, no windows open, no breath left in her lungs.
The candle flared, the salt blew outward, and the canvas cracked. Not torn, split, right down the center of the false face, through the mimic's too wide smile, through the stolen eyes. Ji-yoon stepped forward, clutching the drawing to her chest, and then she pushed it into the tear. The image slid between the canvas fibers like a blade into skin, and the air screamed, not in sound, in pressure, in memory. The mimic fought. It writhed behind the painting. It flashed faces. Her, the shaman, the girl on the ceiling, the smile that never faded. But Yoon held steady until the light dimmed, until the canvas sealed itself shut again, and the mimic was gone. When she awoke on the floor hours later, the candles were spent, the salt was scattered, and the painting was blank, empty. No color, no form, just white gesso across wood. It had been wiped clean. She touched it, cool, still. Her name was no longer on the plaque. She wasn't the artist, she was the seal. And the mimic was part of the canvas now, forever hidden, forever still, forever watched. Ji-yoon didn't return to the gallery. She didn't sell any more art. She drew, yes, but only for herself. She understood now. Some images are not meant to be shared, some mirrors are not meant to be opened, and some spirits only know how to speak through those who see them too deeply. She still saw it sometimes in her dreams, the mimic, trapped behind that final page, staring, waiting. But she never drew it again, and it never moved, because she had made her choice. To trap, not to trade, to seal, not to serve, and because finally she had stopped being afraid of her own reflection.
It rained the morning Ji-yoon knew it was time. Not heavy, not storming, just soft, steady rainfall. The kind that wrapped around windows like a blanket and made the city blur into watercolors. The kind that made her studio glow quiet and silver. She hadn't drawn in weeks, not since sealing the mimic, not since watching her name vanish from the gallery wall, her work disappear without credit, her presence quietly erased to protect something no one else could see. She had given the spirit what it wanted and lost something in return. Or so she thought. That morning she sat by the window, staring into the distance. The world outside shimmered under the weight of soft gray light. Drops gathered on the glass like falling eyes. She opened her sketchbook, not out of duty, not out of fear, but from longing. Not to seal anything, not to fight, but to remember, to reclaim. She held the pencil lightly, letting her hand rest for a moment on the paper. And then, slowly, she began to draw. Not a face, not a spirit, not the mimic or the mirror. She drew herself. Not perfectly, but truthfully. The lines came slowly at first, a tilted jaw, the scar under her lip, the heaviness in the eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. She didn't erase anything. She didn't hide the exhaustion or smooth out the tension in her brows. She drew the woman who had watched shadows crawl from her own hands and still found a way to lift a pencil again. She drew her fear, not as a monster, but as a fog that cleared. She drew her silence, not as absence, but as space where truth could grow. She drew every part of herself the mirror had twisted,
fractured, distorted. And by the time the sketch was done, she was crying, not out of sorrow, out of relief, because she saw herself again, unfiltered, unmasked, unpossessed, and alive. There was no ritual this time, no salt circles, no candlelight, no breath behind the wall, just Jiyeon in a quiet room looking at the truest version of herself she had ever drawn. And something shifted, not in the air, in her. The fear released her, not like a ghost departing, not like a scream fading, but like an old coat taken off, something she had worn for too long. She didn't need it anymore. She wasn't a host. She wasn't a vessel. She was an artist. And this time, the mirror had nothing left to steal. Later that evening, she placed the final sketch inside a black frame. She hung it on the wall across from her desk, not to admire, not to forget, to remember that survival wasn't just about escape, it was about becoming. And this drawing wasn't a warning, it was proof that she had looked into something that mimicked her soul and chose not to become it. There was one more thing left to do. She took out a clean page, one she hadn't touched, crisp and white. She drew a single circle, not red, not jagged, just smooth, closed. And in the center, she wrote, "You do not live here anymore." Then she folded the page and tucked it behind the final sketch. A quiet seal, not for the spirit, but for herself. A declaration that this space, this mind, was hers again, and would remain so. That night, Jiyeon slept deeply. No mirror, no mimic, no shifting reflections or whispering pages, just dreams of sunlight warming paper and a pencil in her hand, drawing not what haunted her, but what healed her.
Time passed. Seasons shifted. Rain turned to snow. Snow melted into blossoms. Blossoms gave way to heat and dust, and evening cicadas that buzzed like ghostly static. Jiyeon lived. She didn't move again. She stayed in the small studio, tucked away behind a quiet street where no one asked questions and nothing watched her from the walls. Her days were soft. She sketched again, yes, but not for galleries, not for followers, not for anything other than the pleasure of noticing. A crooked leaf, a crumpled bus ticket, the way light hit the corner of an empty chair. Her art was hers again, and her name was her own. But sometimes, on still nights, she felt it again. Not a presence, just a trace, a pulse of cold along the base of her neck, a shimmer at the edge of glass, a flicker of something not quite gone. She never opened mirrors after sunset. She never left her sketchbooks unattended. And when she did draw herself, rarely, cautiously, she only did it with natural light, soft pencils, and one rule: never finish the eyes first, because the eyes are where it begins, always. One evening, while dusting her bookshelf,
Ji-yoon came across the framed sketch, the one she'd hung across from her desk months ago. Her true self, drawn in stillness, reclaimed in strength. She lifted it gently off the hook, traced the edge of the glass, and there, faint and impossible to notice at first, she saw it. A smudge inside the frame. Not dirt, not moisture. A mark, faint, curved, like a fingerprint from the inside. Her chest went tight. She opened the frame, removed the sketch. Behind it, the folded page, the circle she had drawn, the line that said, "You do not live here anymore." Still intact, still sealed. But now another line had appeared beneath it. Same handwriting, not hers,